losing everything, living on the streets? Then one selfless act changes your destiny forever. What if saving a life wasn't just about heroism, but about unlocking a future you never dreamed possible? Get ready to explore the unbelievable journey of a man who went from homelessness to becoming an unexpected billionaire, and discover the incredible consequences of such a dramatic transformation. If you're ready to see how one moment of courage can rewrite the laws of destiny, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because this story defies every logic of the modern world. The humidity of a Washington, D.C. summer clings to the skin like a shroud, but for Cyprian Reed, it's just another layer of the exhaustion he's carried since the world turned its back on him. He is a man built of tempered steel and silent observations, a former high-end security consultant who lost his firm and his family in a legal frame-up that left him with nothing but his integrity and the scars on his knuckles. The marble monuments of the city glow with a cold, uncaring light in the distance, but the alleyways here are hungry, swallowing the screams of those who wander too far from the tourist paths of Foggy Bottom. Tonight, the silence is broken by the rhythmic, panicked clicking of expensive dress shoes on brick and the low, predatory growl of a blacked-out sedan idling at the mouth of the alley. Cyprian watches from his cardboard shelter as director Doh-yun Lim, the reclusive architect of the global Lim Horizon conglomerate, is cornered by four men whose suits are as sharp as the knives they've just drawn in the flickering orange glow of a dying street lamp. These aren't common thieves. They move with a military precision that tells Cyprian this is a professional extraction, a kidnapping designed to shift the global markets by morning. Before the lead mercenary can zip-tie the director's hands, Cyprian emerges from the shadows like a vengeful ghost, his movements a masterclass in tactical efficiency that he hasn't tapped into since his life was incinerated. He doesn't waste energy on words. He uses the environment, turning a discarded iron pipe into a lever and his own body into an unbreakable shield, neutralizing the first two attackers with strikes that sound like a gavel hitting a bench. The air is thick with the scent of rain-slicked trash and the metallic tang of blood as Cyprian takes a heavy blow to the ribs to keep Lim from being dragged into the waiting vehicle. He stands his ground, a towering black man in rags guarding a trembling Korean titan, his eyes projecting a level of lethal intent that forces the remaining attackers to rethink their paycheck and retreat into the heavy city fog. Director Lim, gasping for air and clutching his shattered glasses, looks up at his savior with a gaze that is both terrified and intensely analytical, seeing a man who shouldn't exist in the margins of society. In that moment of absolute chaos, the CEO sees a purity of character that his billions have never been able to purchase in the boardrooms of Seoul or DC. He reaches out, his hand gripping Cyprian's scarred forearm, and the weight of the moment shifts the very gravity of the city. Cyprian tries to melt back into the darkness, his duty to his own humanity fulfilled, but Lim's voice stops him, a voice that sounds like the closing of a heavy vault door. "I have spent my life buying loyalty and finding only ghosts," Lim whispers, his eyes burning with a sudden, experimental fire, "but you just gave me my life for free, so now I am going to see if you can survive the burden of having everything." Before Cyprian can even refuse, Lim taps an encrypted sequence into his watch, triggering a massive, untraceable transfer to a dormant account he's just created in Cyprian's name, a balance of exactly $1 billion. Cyprian looks at the smartphone Lim shoves into his hand, the screen glowing with more zeros than his mind can process, and the world he knew is instantly incinerated by the heat of a digital fortune. But as the CEO's private security finally swarms the alley, Lim leans in one last time, his expression unreadable and cold. "It's yours, Cyprian Reed, but remember, the money is a mirror, and you might not like what you see looking back." As the armored transport whisks Lim away, Cyprian is left standing in the humid dark with $1 billion and a target on his soul. He didn't know the truth yet, but the money wasn't a gift, it was the opening move of a psychological chess game where his humanity was the ultimate prize. Cyprian Reed wakes up the next morning not to the abrasive sound of city sirens or the cold bite of concrete, but to the hushed, climate-controlled silence of a master suite at the Ethelred, a skyscraper in the heart of the District of Columbia that overlooks the Potomac River like a glass sentinel. The bed is draped in 1,200 thread-count Egyptian cotton that feels like liquid silk against his skin, a sensation so foreign and invasive that his first instinct is to roll onto the floor and check for his boots. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror is a fractured masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. He has been scrubbed, groomed, and trimmed by a team of silent professionals who moved through the room like specters while he was locked in a deep, medically induced sleep of pure exhaustion. He is now draped in a bespoke navy blue suit crafted from vicuña wool, a fabric so rare it feels like wearing a shadow, yet it carries the weight of 1,000 eyes. The transition is a violent sensory assault, a jarring upward mobility that leaves his mind spinning in a vacuum of choice where every whim is met with a practiced bow and every basic human need is anticipated by a staff that treats him like a resurrected deity while secretly scanning his wrists for the scars of the street. He spends the first few hours of his new life staring at the gold-plated smartphone on the nightstand, watching the banking application display a balance of exactly $1 billion. A number so vast it ceases to be money and becomes a celestial body with its own gravity. The first real test of his new reality comes when he walks into an ultra-exclusive bank on K Street, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs that the tailored suit can't quite hide. The air inside the bank is thick with the scent of old wood, expensive tobacco, and the silent, suffocating judgment of the elite who look at his dark skin and his hardened gaze with a mixture of curiosity and primal fear. The moment the account number is scanned, the atmosphere in the room undergoes a sickening chemical change. The teller's dismissive sneer melts into a trembling mask of adoration, and the branch manager practically sprints across the marble floor to offer Cyprian a seat in a private vault. It is a terrifying display of how the world truly functions, a realization that his humanity was a ghost yesterday but is a god today because of a digital ledger. He spends the afternoon navigating the high-end boutiques of Georgetown, buying things not out of desire but out of a desperate need to build a fortress of material things to protect the man he used to be. He buys a car that costs more than the security firm he lost, a watch that tracks the lunar cycles of planets he'll never visit, and a wardrobe that feels like a costume for a play he never auditioned for. He sits in a 5-star restaurant where the menus are written in calligraphy and the wine costs $5,000 a bottle, and he realizes with a sinking gut that he is the only person in the room who knows the exact metallic taste of rainwater collected in a tin can. He tries to tip a young waiter $10,000 just to see if it will buy a second of genuine human connection, but the look in the man's eyes, a toxic slurry of gratitude and instant greed, confirms Cyprian's worst fear. The money is a weapon that changes the trajectory of every soul it touches. He is a man caught in a cultural vacuum, navigating a sea of unimaginable riches where the waves are made of silk and the wind is the whispering of people who want to skin him for a share of his fortune. As he leaves the restaurant, he catches a glimpse of a silver drone hovering just above the streetlights, its high-definition lens tracking the micro-expressions on his face as he adjusts his cufflinks. High above in a darkened boardroom at Lim Horizon, director Doh-yun Lim sits in a leather chair, watching the drone's feed across 12 different monitors that display Cyprian's heart rate, pupil dilation, and gait analysis in real time. He is trying to buy his way out of the trauma, Lim whispers to his shadow-wrapped advisor, a flicker of disappointment crossing his sharp features. But he doesn't realize that the more he spends, the more he belongs to me. Cyprian returns to his penthouse to find a single, unmarked white envelope waiting for him on the marble kitchen island, the scent of the paper triggering a memory of a life he thought was incinerated. He tears it open to find a photograph of a little girl with eyes exactly like his own, a daughter he hasn't seen since the day the legal system stripped him of his name and his freedom. There is no return address, only a single sentence written in elegant, familiar handwriting that makes the billionaire's world tilt on its axis. $1 billion can buy a city, Cyprian, but can it buy back a father's soul? He didn't know the truth yet, but the money wasn't a gift for his survival. It was the fuel for a fire that was about to burn down every secret he had ever tried to protect. What he did next would either lead him to his family or straight into the mouth of a trap he wasn't yet prepared to face. Cyprian Reed stares at the photograph until the glossy edges cut into his thumb, the image of his daughter acting as a physical anchor to a life he thought was lost in the ruins of his reputation. He realizes in a heartbeat that Director Lim didn't just give him a fortune. He gave him a beacon that illuminates every shadow of his past, making him a visible target for anyone who ever knew his name. He spends the next 6 hours in a frantic digital fever, using his new, unlimited resources to track the origins of the mysterious note to a coastal enclave in Connecticut. The sheer, terrifying speed at which he can now move, chartering a private jet with a single tap, hiring a top-tier security detail, and bypassing years of legal red tape, is an intoxicating drug that leaves him breathless. He arrives in the quiet, manicured streets of Greenwich looking like a modern king, but the armored SUVs and the stone-faced men surrounding him make him feel more like a predator invading a sanctuary. When he finally stands before the modest, ivy-covered house where his daughter is supposedly living, his hand freezes on the wrought iron gate. He is hit by the agonizing realization that his $1 billion cannot buy back the 3 birthdays he missed or the silence he left behind. Before he can find the courage to knock, his phone vibrates with a high-priority notification from a private investigator. The man who framed him 3 years ago has just been spotted at the airport, and he isn't alone. The weight of the gold in Cyprian's pocket suddenly feels like lead, dragging him down into the realization that his new status hasn't just attracted his family, it has resurrected his most lethal enemies. He retreats back to the District of Columbia, the isolation of his success beginning to feel like a sensory deprivation chamber where the only sound is the rhythmic, mechanical ticking of a watch that costs more than a suburban home. He stops by the local shelter where he used to find refuge, intending to write a check that would transform 100 lives, but the moment he steps out of his vehicle, the air turns cold with resentment. His old friends, the men he used to share a fire and a story with, look at his tailored suit and his polished skin as if he were a ghost or a traitor. One of them, a man Cyprian once called a brother, refuses to even take a meal from his hand, spitting at the dirt near Cyprian's pristine shoes. "You're not the man who saved that so anymore," the man growls, his voice full of a weary bitterness. "You're just another suit playing God with people's misery." The words cut deeper than any blade in a rainy alleyway, forcing Cyprian to confront a truth he isn't ready for. He is losing his identity to the very currency that was supposed to set him free. He returns to his penthouse to find it transformed into a den of vultures, socialites, lobbyists, and high-stakes opportunists who have smelled the fresh scent of $1 billion and are circling like sharks in silk. They offer him invitations to the inner sanctums of power and partnerships in foundations that are nothing more than tax shelters, their smiles as manufactured and cold as the jewelry they wear. He realizes that to them he is no longer a human being. He is a resource to be mined, a political asset to be managed until he is hollowed out and discarded. In a moment of suffocating clarity, he pushes through the crowd to the balcony, gasping for air that doesn't smell like expensive perfume and cheap ambition. He looks down at the city lights, the Capitol dome shimmering like a piece of fool's gold in the distance, and realizes that every move he has made since the alleyway has been anticipated by Director Lim. He pulls up his banking app to transfer a massive, anonymous sum to the shelter, a final, desperate act of rebellion against the greed closing in on him. But the screen flashes a violent red with a single, chilling message. Transaction denied. Insufficient clearance for ethical distribution. He didn't know the truth yet, but his $1 billion was never actually his to spend. It was a leash made of digital gold, and Director Lim was about to pull it tight. The red text on the screen pulses like a digital heartbeat, a cold mockery of the freedom Cyprian Reed thought he had purchased with his own blood in that rain-slicked alley, leaving him standing in the center of his marble kitchen island with a realization that makes the air in the penthouse feel thin and artificial. He hurls the gold-plated smartphone across the room, but the device doesn't shatter, it merely slides across the polished floor with a dull, expensive thud, a reminder that even his rage is now muffled by the soft textures of extreme luxury and the silent, judging eyes of the automated systems. He realizes with a sickening jolt to his stomach that he is not a billionaire, but a high-value asset trapped in a biological ledger, his movements restricted by an invisible fence built of complex algorithms and legal fine print he never had the chance to read. The psychological toll of the test begins to manifest as a low-frequency hum in the back of his mind, a constant state of hypervigilance where every humming light fixture, every sleek smart appliance, and every reflective surface feels like a hidden lens recording his descent into paranoia. He flees the District of Columbia, driving north toward the glass and steel canyons of New York City in his armored SUV, hoping that the sheer, crushing anonymity of the Manhattan crowds will provide the shield his money cannot buy. But even in the heart of the city, the surveillance is absolute. He sees the same silver drone from Georgetown hovering near the spire of the Lim Horizon headquarters, its mechanical eye blinking in a rhythmic, taunting code that follows him through the winding streets of Tribeca. He tries to check into a hotel under a rare, AI-generated pseudonym, Kalen Vane, but the concierge greets him by his real name before he can even reach for his black card, the system recognizing his biometric signature and iris patterns with a terrifying, instantaneous precision. He finds himself pacing the length of a 1,000-square-foot suite on the 80th floor, the opulence of the room beginning to feel like a high-tech sensory deprivation chamber where the only feedback he receives is the fluctuating price of Lim Horizon stock and the silent, creeping dread of being a ghost in his own life. The isolation is a slow-acting poison, turning his memories of the streets, the shared warmth of a trash can fire, the raw honesty of a struggle for a single meal, the brotherhood of the invisible, into a paradise he can never return to because the gold has cauterized his connection to the common man. He begins to question the very nature of his heroism that night in the alleyway. Was his intervention a genuine act of selfless courage, or was he merely a predictable variable in a massive psychological experiment designed to see if a man's soul has a breaking point? He reaches out to Director Lim via an encrypted channel he paid a dark web specialist a fortune to open, his voice a ragged edge of desperation and cold fury, but the only response is a pre-recorded message that sounds like a clinical observation of a lab specimen. Character is not what you do when you have nothing, Cyprian. It is what you become when you can have anything, and so far, you are proving to be exactly as expensive as I predicted. The voice of Lim whispers through the speakers of his suite, echoing the hollow void growing in his chest. The weight of this realization crushes the air from his lungs as he stares at the city below, the people looking like ants scurrying through a maze that he now realizes he owns on paper but cannot control in reality. He tries to drown the existential dread in the finest whiskeys and the loudest music the city has to offer, but the silence that follows every spent dollar is louder than the noise, a reminder that he is the loneliest man in a city of 8 million. He is a man who has traded his invisibility for a gilded cage, and the bars are made of the very gold he thought would finally set him free and find his daughter. He spends the night watching a live feed of his own bank account on the wall-size television, seeing the interest accrue at a rate that could feed a village for a year, yet he cannot even buy a hot dog for a man on the corner without triggering a high-level security alert and a protocol violation warning. His search for purpose beyond consumption becomes a frantic, aimless journey through the high-end galleries and exclusive clubs of Manhattan, but everyone he meets looks like a curated version of a human being, their eyes reflecting only the dollar signs they see when he enters the room. He begins to doubt his own sanity, wondering if the test includes hallucinogens or subtle environmental triggers meant to erode his sense of self until he is nothing more than a vessel for Lim's corporate will. He realizes that the more he has, the less he is, a mathematical paradox that is stripping him of his name, his past, and his hope for a future that doesn't involve a ledger. But as the sun begins to bleed a bruised purple over the Atlantic horizon, a new notification flashes on his screen, one that wasn't sent by Lim's servers or the bank's automated systems. It is an invitation to a sub-level floor of the Manhattan headquarters that doesn't exist on any public blueprint, a place where the test is finally scheduled to reach its terminal phase. He didn't know the truth yet, but the $1 billion wasn't just a test of his soul, it was the price of admission to a secret war he was already losing without firing a single shot. He grabbed his coat, the silk lining feeling like ice against his skin, and stepped into the private elevator, the descent beginning before he even touched the controls. The elevator doesn't just descend, it drops into a silence so absolute it feels like the weight of the entire city of New York is pressing down on Cyprian Reed's chest, the floor indicator blinking past sublevels that don't exist on any public architectural blueprint. The doors slide open with a hiss of pressurized nitrogen, revealing not a boardroom or a laboratory, but a cavernous, dimly lit sanctum beneath the Manhattan bedrock that looks like a high-tech nerve center for a war that hasn't been declared yet. Director Doh-yun Lim is there, standing in front of a wall of panoramic screens that don't show stock prices or news feeds, but a terrifyingly intimate mosaic of Cyprian's life over the last month. Every moment of doubt, every secret purchase, and every tear shed for the daughter he cannot reach. Lim looks older in the cold blue light, his silhouette sharp against the monitors, a man whose billions have bought him the power to watch the world but have cost him the ability to live within it. You've arrived exactly 4 minutes later than my projections suggested, which means you still have a flicker of a soul that resists the gravity of my world, Lim says, his voice a dry, echoing rasp in the sterile air of the bunker. Cyprian doesn't move, his hands curled into fists that the tailored wool of his suit can't hide, the rage of a month-long manipulation finally boiling over into a lethal clarity. He realizes with a sickening jolt to his gut that the mugging in the DC alley was a meticulously choreographed performance. The attackers hired from the very security firm Cyprian once owned, and the director's vulnerability was a bait designed to catch a specific kind of fish. I didn't give you $1 billion to reward you, Cyprian. I gave it to you to see if you were the architect I needed to replace me, or just another laborer who would be crushed by the weight of the materials. Lim continues, his eyes tracking the micro-expressions on Cyprian's face with a clinical, predatory focus. The test was a global succession audition, a psychological gauntlet meant to strip away the weakness of empathy and replace it with the cold, calculating survival instinct of a corporate god. Lim reveals that the $1 billion was the exact amount needed to settle the lawsuits from Cyprian's past, to buy back his daughter's custody, and to destroy the men who framed him, but it could only be unlocked if he proved he was willing to sacrifice his humanity to keep it. The psychological toll of the revelation hits Cyprian like a physical blow, the realization that his daughter's safety was used as a bargaining chip in a game of billionaire chess, making the air in the bunker feel toxic. He sees his daughter's face on a screen, a live feed from a secure location in California, and for a second, the gold in his accounts feels like a blood price he is being forced to pay for a love he already earned in the trenches. But as Lim steps forward to offer the final contract, the keys to the Lim Horizon empire and a life of untouchable power, Cyprian notices the one thing the director didn't account for in his master algorithm. He didn't know the truth yet, but Cyprian hadn't just been a passenger in the gilded cage. He had been using his meaningless luxury spending to quietly fund a counterintelligence network of the very men the world had discarded. The test was about to have its first unintended result, as the silence of the bunker was shattered by a notification that didn't come from Lim's server, but from a satellite link that Cyprian had bought with his own secret currency of trust. He looked at the director, a man who thought he had calculated every variable, and for the first time in the history of the experiment, the billionaire felt a flicker of genuine fear. "You thought you were teaching me how to be a king," Cyprian whispered, his voice vibrating with a power that no bank account could hold, "but you forgot that a king is nothing without the people he left in the dark." He didn't wait for a response. He tapped a single command on his watch that would either reset the game or incinerate the entire board, leaving them both in the dark they had tried so hard to escape. But that was only the beginning of the true reveal. What Lim said next changed everything. "You think you've won because you found the surveillance," Lim whispered, a dark smile touching his lips, "but you haven't asked why I chose you specifically out of 10,000 other men." The room suddenly went pitch black, the only light coming from a single monitor that displayed a medical file from 20 years ago, a file that showed Cyprian Reed and Doh-yun Lim shared more than just a rainy alleyway. They shared a bloodline that had been kept secret by a mother who fled the Lim empire to save her son from the very life he was now being forced to lead. The billionaire's new clothes were actually a birthright, and the test was a father's last, desperate attempt to find a son he was never allowed to know. Cyprian felt the world tilt on its axis as the true weight of the gold finally settled in his chest, realized that he wasn't a lab rat, but the heir to a throne he never wanted. But the truth was even more dangerous than the lie, and he didn't know yet if he would survive the night to tell his daughter who she really was. The darkness of the Manhattan bunker isn't just an absence of light. It is a heavy, suffocating weight that presses against Cyprian Reed's skin, vibrating with the hum of servers that hold the power to collapse nations. But the silence between him and the man he now knows is his father is louder than any machine. Director Doh-yun Lim stands motionless, a silhouette of a fading dynasty waiting for a verdict that no amount of gold can influence, while Cyprian feels the pinstriped wool of his billion-dollar suit beginning to feel like a shroud for the man he was only an hour ago. He realizes that the test wasn't a search for a successor, but a desperate, dying man's attempt to transplant his own cold heart into a body that still knew how to feel, a realization that sends a surge of icy clarity through his veins. Cyprian doesn't reach for the contract or the crown. Instead, he uses the tactical interface on his watch, the very one Lim gave him to monitor his life, to initiate a series of high-speed commands that have been dormant in his mind since his days as a security consultant. He isn't just a billionaire now. He is a man with the keys to the kingdom and the knowledge of where every structural weakness lies, and he begins to systematically dismantle the test infrastructure from the inside out. He doesn't destroy the money. He redirects the gravity of the Lim Horizon fortune, funneling the billions not into stock buybacks or offshore accounts, but into a decentralized trust that cannot be touched by the board of directors or Lim's treacherous legitimate heirs. The air in the bunker grows cold as the screens flicker and die, replaced by a single, glowing blueprint of a new kind of city, a network of Reed Commons that will span from the District of Columbia to the sun-scorched valleys of California. He turns to the man who gave him life and then tried to buy it back, seeing the director not as a titan of industry, but as a lonely architect who forgot that the most important part of any structure is the human soul it houses. "I'm not your replacement, Lim," Cyprian whispers, his voice carrying the resonant authority of a man who has walked through fire and come out as steel. "I'm the consequence of your choices, and the legacy starts by giving back everything you tried to steal from the world." He walks out of the bunker as the lights begin to pulse with a new, independent energy, leaving the director standing in the wreckage of his own game, a billionaire with nothing left but the truth. The story of the homeless billionaire doesn't end with a wedding or a corporate merger. It ends in a modest, sun-drenched garden in a quiet corner of Connecticut where a little girl looks up from her books to see a man she hasn't seen in 3 years standing at the gate. He isn't wearing the navy blue vicuña wool suit or the $5,000 watch. He is wearing a simple denim jacket and carrying a worn-out teddy bear he bought at a corner store in New York, his eyes finally free of the gold-induced vertigo. The transition back to a life of meaning is a slow, beautiful ascent, as Cyprian uses his resources to build a future for thousands of families while ensuring his own daughter never knows the weight of a golden cage. He becomes the invisible hand of a new kind of philanthropy, one that doesn't demand headlines or worship, but focuses on the quiet, unglamorous work of restoring dignity to the dispossessed. Director Lim passes away in the winter of 2026, leaving behind a company that has been transformed into a non-profit engine for global change, a final act of penance that ensures the name Lim will finally be associated with something other than greed. Cyprian stands on a cliffside in Malibu, watching the Pacific horizon swallow the sun, realizing that the greatest test of his life wasn't surviving the streets or managing the billions, but finding the strength to remain real in a world that pays people to be fake. He is no longer the man who saved a life for a reward. He is the man who saved himself by realizing that the only currency that truly matters is the time we spend with the people we love. The journey from the alleyway to the boardroom was a circle, leading him back to the simple, unbreakable truth that you can't buy a legacy. You have to live it every single day with every choice you make. If this unbelievable journey of transformation and the ultimate victory of the human spirit touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that challenge the way you see the world. This was the story of Cyprian Reed, the man who was given everything and realized it was nothing compared to the power of a father's love. And now, the true journey finally begins.